I first heard the sound 3 nights ago, a low, rhythmic tapping, like someone drumming their fingers against a wooden table, slow and deliberate. It came from the apartment next door, 3B. At first I ignored it. I live in an old building, and old buildings make noises. Pipes groan, floorboards creak, walls settle. But this was different. The sound wasn't random. It had a pattern. 4 taps, a pause, 3 taps, a longer pause. Then it would start again. It wasn't the kind of noise that came from plumbing or settling wood. It was intentional. Then last night, the tapping changed. It became frantic, desperate, like someone was trying to send a message but couldn't quite form the words. I pressed my ear to the wall and listened, my breath shallow. Between the taps, I swore I heard something else, something soft, like a whisper. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I couldn't make out the words. I knocked back. 3 times, cautiously. The tapping stopped immediately. Silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Then, from the other side of the wall, something scraped. A long, slow drag, like fingernails raking across the wood. I stumbled back, my skin prickling with cold. The next morning, I saw the building superintendent, Mr. Langley, as he was hauling a bag of trash out to the dumpster. "Hey," I called out, trying to keep my voice casual. "Does someone new live in 3B? I keep hearing noises." Langley gave me a strange look, then shook his head. "Ain't nobody in 3B. Hasn't been for months." My stomach tightened. "But I hear." I stopped myself. Maybe I was imagining things, maybe I was losing it. But that night, the tapping returned, louder than before, more insistent. I clutched my blanket, staring at the ceiling, waiting for it to stop. But it didn't. It only got worse. By midnight, it was no longer just tapping. I heard shuffling, a dragging sound, moving from one end of the apartment to the other, and then breathing, slow, shallow, too close. My chest tightened. I grabbed my phone and typed a text to my friend Jason, my fingers shaking. "Something's in 3B. I don't know what, but I think it knows I'm listening." I hesitated before hitting send. It sounded crazy, but just as I pressed the button, my phone screen dimmed, the battery draining from 62% to dead in an instant. I barely slept that night, and when morning came, I was exhausted, but I had to know the truth. I went to Langley's office and asked him to let me into 3B. He was reluctant, but eventually agreed, muttering about crazy tenants and ghost stories. When he unlocked the door, my heart pounded. The apartment was empty. Mostly. The walls were covered in deep gouges, as if someone had been clawing at them. The floor was littered with old newspapers, all featuring missing person reports. And then I saw it. The words scrawled in dark, faded red across the far wall. "I hear you too." A chill crawled down my spine. Langley swore under his breath and backed out of the apartment, leaving me standing there, frozen. I turned slowly, feeling something, someone watching me. And then, clear as day, from just behind me, I heard a voice, barely above a whisper. "Knock 3 times. I ran. I didn't go back to my apartment right away. I couldn't. Instead, I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My breath came in ragged gasps, my pulse thundering in my ears. "I hear you too." The words on the wall were burned into my mind, looping over and over, each time laced with a new, unbearable dread. Someone or something knew I was listening. It had been waiting. The worst part? The voice. That whisper, so close, so intentional. My apartment no longer felt safe, but where else could I go? Eventually, exhaustion won over fear, and I dragged myself back upstairs. The hallway was empty, the overhead lights flickering weakly. As I passed 3B, I hesitated, heart hammering. I pressed my hand against the door, not knocking, just feeling. It was cold, too cold. My breath hitched. I stepped away quickly and slipped into my own unit, locking the door behind me. I checked every room, every closet, under the bed. Nothing. Just me. And yet, as I stood in the middle of my living room, the hair on my arms stood on end. That feeling, the one you get when someone is watching, coiled around me like an invisible hand. I turned off every light, forcing the room into darkness. I wanted to see I needed to see if something would move in the shadows. I held my breath. And then, tap, tap, tap. From inside my own apartment, I choked on air, stumbling back, my hands scrambling for anything to hold on to. The tapping wasn't from 3B, it was inside, just behind me. A tremor ran through my spine, cold and electric. I turned, forcing myself to look. The closet door across the room was open, just an inch. I never leave it open, ever. My stomach twisted. The tapping started again, softer now, like fingertips trailing along the wooden frame. A quiet breath ghosted from the darkness within. I bolted, grabbing my keys, my phone, forgetting shoes, forgetting everything, just running. I pounded on Jason's door like a lunatic. He answered after what felt like hours, bleary-eyed and confused. Jesus, man, what the hell? I pushed past him, slamming the door shut behind me. It's not just 3B, I gasped. It's in my apartment now. Jason frowned, still half asleep. Dude, what are you talking about? My hands shook as I explained. 3B, the tapping, the whispers, the closet door. He rubbed his face. Look, man, you've been stressed lately. You sure you're not just... Something knocked on Jason's door 3 times. Slow, precise. We both froze. He stared at me, his face draining of color. Who the hell? Another knock. This time, a little harder. Jason moved toward the peephole. Don't, I whispered. He hesitated, then looked. His whole body stiffened. There's no one there, he whispered. But the knocking hadn't stopped, it had only gotten louder. Then, from behind us, inside Jason's apartment, another knock. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember running. All I know is that Jason and I ended up in his car, the engine running, our hands shaking. We sat there in silence, staring up at the building, at the windows of 3B. The curtains moved. Not like a breeze had caught them, like someone was standing there, watching. Then my phone vibrated. A text. Unknown number. 5 words, you should have knocked 3. I dropped the phone. Jason picked it up, his fingers trembling. He read the message, his breath coming short. Then he turned to me, voice barely above a whisper. You didn't tell me the whole story, did you? I didn't answer, because the truth was, I wasn't sure anymore. And somewhere, from the depths of my apartment, the tapping started again. Jason didn't speak to me for the first few minutes after we left my apartment building. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly I could hear the faint creak of the leather under his fingers. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on us, thick and suffocating. My thoughts spiraled. Was it following me? Was it inside Jason's apartment now? And worst of all, was it always there, waiting, watching, until I finally noticed? Where do you want to go? Jason finally asked, his voice tight. My throat felt dry. Anywhere but here. As he drove, I stared at my phone. The message was still there. You should have knocked 3. My skin crawled just reading it. The number was unknown. I considered blocking it, deleting it, but deep down I knew it wouldn't matter. Whatever this was, it wasn't something I could just ignore. I wanted to believe there was a rational explanation, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made a mistake, a terrible one, and now I was in its sight. Jason pulled into an all-night diner on the outskirts of town. We sat in a corner booth, nursing cups of coffee that neither of us actually drank. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly, casting everything in a sickly glow. Jason finally broke the silence. You need to tell me everything. I hesitated. I already did. He shook his head. No, you didn't. I saw your face when you got that text. What aren't you telling me? I swallowed hard. My hands shook as I set my cup down. It's not just the tapping. I think I saw something in 3B. Jason leaned in, his expression darkening. What do you mean, saw something? My voice was barely above a whisper. When Langley opened the door, just for a second, I thought I saw. My throat closed up. I hadn't let myself fully acknowledge it until now, but I had seen something, a shape, a shadow that moved even though nothing else had. It had been watching from the far corner of the room, deep in the dark, just beyond where the light reached. And when I turned to leave, I could have sworn it moved toward me. Jason exhaled slowly. He rubbed a hand over his face, looking exhausted. Okay. All right. We need to figure out what's going on. He pulled out his phone and started searching. Maybe there's something about 3B online. Old crime reports, urban legends, anything. He scrolled in silence while I stared at the black screen of the diner window, my reflection distorted, unreal. Then, suddenly, Jason's breath hitched. Dude, he muttered, eyes wide, you need to see this. He turned his phone toward me. The article was old, dated nearly 20 years ago. The headline sent an icy spike through my chest. Tenant in apartment 3B found dead after mysterious disturbances, authorities baffled. My hands trembled as I read. A man named Daniel Conroy had lived there. He had complained for months about strange noises, knocking, tapping, whispers at night. No one believed him. His friends thought he was losing his mind. The landlord dismissed him. until one day he was found dead in his living room. No forced entry, no signs of struggle, just gone. And the only thing out of place? The message on the wall, scrawled in his own blood. I hear you too. A cold shudder ran through me, my stomach twisted. I wanted to be sick. I looked up at Jason, but he was staring past me, his face pale. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. His eyes, wide, terrified, fixed on something behind me. My blood turned to ice. Slowly, stiffly, I turned my head. The diner's glass window should have reflected only the empty parking lot behind me, but it didn't. Something else was there. A shape, just barely visible, a silhouette in the dark, tall, motionless, watching. Its outline flickered, not quite solid, like something struggling to exist where it shouldn't. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was looking right at me. Jason grabbed my arm, yanking me away from the window. The glass rattled, the lights in the diner flickered, and then, just as quickly, it was gone. The waitress approached cautiously, looking between us. You guys okay?" Jason didn't answer. He was already on his feet, pulling me up with him. "We need to go," he muttered. I barely registered what was happening as he dragged me outside. The air was freezing, colder than it should have been. My breath fogged in front of me. I turned back toward the window, nothing, just our reflections. But I knew what I saw. We got into Jason's car, and he locked the doors. His hands were shaking. "This isn't just about 3B, he said. "It's following you." I didn't respond, because deep down I knew he was right. And as Jason sped away from the diner, my phone vibrated again. A new message. "It's too late to run." Jason drove in silence. The streetlights passed in a blur, casting long, distorted shadows across the dashboard. I could still feel the cold from the diner window on my skin, the way the glass had rattled as if someone, was trying to get through. My phone sat heavy in my lap, the last message glowing on the screen. "It's too late to run." I wanted to throw it out the window, smash it, destroy any trace of whatever had wormed its way into my life. But I knew it wouldn't matter. You can't escape something that doesn't need doors to enter. Jason exhaled sharply. "We can't go back to your place." His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "And I don't know if my apartment is safe either." His voice was strained, like he was trying to convince himself he wasn't losing his mind. "We need a plan." I barely heard him. My thoughts were spiraling. That thing, whatever it was, had been with me since I first heard the tapping. It had moved from 3B. It had followed me into my home. It had been standing right behind me in the diner. And the worst part? I was starting to feel something else beneath the fear. A whisper of familiarity, like it knew me. Jason pulled into an empty parking lot behind a 24-hour convenience store. The neon glow from the sign buzzed faintly, flickering at the edges. He put the car in park and turned to me. "We need to find out what happened in that apartment." The guy, the one from the article, Conroy. He unlocked his phone. "Maybe there's more. Maybe." The radio clicked on. Neither of us had touched it. A burst of static filled the car, high-pitched and warbling, as if something was tuning through frequencies that shouldn't exist. Then, beneath the static, a voice. Faint, garbled, but there. Jason fumbled for the power button, but it wouldn't turn off. The volume dial spun on its own, increasing until the voice pushed through the noise. "Why didn't you knock 3?" I stopped breathing. Jason slammed his palm against the dash, yanking at the knobs, but the radio was locked in place, the voice growing clearer, stronger. "You let it out." The air in the car changed. It grew heavy, thick, pressing against my lungs. The temperature dropped, our breath curling in the space between us. Then from the back seat, a creak. Jason's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. His breath caught. I turned slowly. The back seat was empty, but the door was unlocked. The radio cut off. Silence swallowed the car. Jason didn't hesitate. He slammed the car into drive, tires screeching as we tore out of the lot. My pulse was a hammer in my throat. "What the hell was that?" Jason's voice was wild, frantic. "Did you hear that? Did you?" He stopped mid-sentence, his hands tightening on the wheel. His eyes flicked up to the mirror again. My blood ran cold. I turned, just in time to see it. A reflection. Not mine. Not Jason's. Something else was sitting in the back seat, its face just out of reach of the light. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My voice was gone, trapped in my chest. Jason jerked the wheel. The car swerved, tires screeching as we barely missed slamming into a stop sign. He pulled to the side of the road, panting, his whole body trembling. I turned back. The back seat was empty, but the door was open. Jason stared at me, his eyes wild. "We're dead," he whispered. "Whatever this is, we're dead." I wanted to deny it, tell him we could figure it out, but then my phone vibrated again. A new message, just one word this time. Run. Jason refused to drive any further. We sat in the middle of a deserted road, the car idling, our breath shaky. The night around us was unnervingly still. No wind, no crickets, just silence. I checked my phone. The message was gone, not deleted, erased, like it had never been there at all. I turned to Jason. His hands were shaking on the wheel. "We have to end this," I said. "Whatever this is, it started in 3B. That's where we have to go." Jason looked at me like I was insane. Maybe I was, but I knew, deep in my gut, that running wasn't an option. Not anymore. We drove back to the apartment building in silence. The air grew heavier the closer we got, as if the very walls of the place were breathing. The hallway to 3B felt wrong, like it had stretched impossibly long. The door was unlocked. It swung open at the lightest touch. The room inside was empty. No furniture. No signs of life. Just four walls, stripped bare. And yet, the tapping started immediately. Tap, tap, tap from inside the walls. Jason stepped back, his face pale. Jesus Christ. The air turned ice cold. My breath came out in thick clouds. And then, from the far corner of the room, the shadows shifted. Something moved. The shape unfurled, rising from the darkness like it had been waiting. The figure was tall, its face featureless, but its presence unbearable. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Jason whispered, "What do we do?" And then, from deep inside the walls, a voice answered, "Knock 3." The realization hit me like ice in my veins. It wasn't a warning, it was a rule, a command. With every ounce of strength I had left, I raised my fist, and I knocked. 1, 2, 3. The room shuddered. The walls groaned, cracking like something massive was shifting behind them. The figure lurched, its head snapping toward me, but it was trapped, pulled backward, deeper into the shadows, its form dissolving into the very foundation of the building. The tapping slowed, then stopped. And just like that, it was over. Jason and I stumbled out, gasping for air. The hallway was normal again. The weight that had been pressing down on my chest was gone. I turned back to 3B, expecting something, anything. The door was shut, and this time there was nothing behind it. Jason and I never spoke of that night again. He moved away. I never returned to my apartment. But sometimes, late at night, I hear it. A soft, distant sound. Tap, 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 and I wonder, what happens if someone forgets to knock? Thanks for watching. For more terrifying creepypasta stories, check out the playlists or the video on screen. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Stay safe and stay scared.